Um, we really wanted to put this workshop together last year, and things didn't work out like we had hoped. And so we have a very special privilege this year, and I'm very excited about it. We have Tricia Burtman Gallant, Dr. Gallant's here with us to talk about academic integrity. And David Hill will be joining us in just a little bit to talk about and to follow up with Dr. Gallant's presentation on, what's going on our campus and what are some things that we can do. Dr. Gallant's the author of Academic Integrity in the 21st Century, a teaching and learning imperative. She's the co-author of Cheating in School, What We Know and What We Can Do. She's the editor of Creating the Ethical Academy, a systems approach to understanding misconduct and empowering change in higher education. And she's the section editor for the Handbook of Academic Integrity. She's also the director of the UC San Diego Academic Integrity Office. She's the international director, right? She is the director, She's the international center, the director for the International Center for Academic Integrity Transition co-chair, and has been an ethics lecturer with the Rady School of Management. That's a mouthful. So we are very privileged to have you here. And so welcome.
Thanks. Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here, well, virtually there. Zoom presentations are always a little bit awkward, but I'll do my best to make it not awkward for you. So I have a lot to cover in an hour. I might breeze past a couple of things, but I can always send these slides so that you can have them afterwards. So the first thing I want to do is set the stage in terms of, if I can make my screen go for it. There we go. Set the stage for why we're talking about this. So the data I'm about to show you, it's old. You can see it's from 2005. The reason I still use it is because it involved 80,000 students in North America, and we haven't had a data set that large since then, but all the individual studies I've seen, the numbers don't vary that much, so I like to continue to use the 80,000 number. So this is what is going on now. This is what students say is going on, right? So this is all based on self-reports of cheating. And we know from social desirability bias and survey research that these are going to be underreported. We're not too honest about our dishonesty in surveys, even if they're anonymous. So if 11% say they copy homework from one another, it's probably much higher than that. In fact, I find that one particularly interesting. Of course, it depends on how much quote-unquote homework a particular university or particular program gives a student, whether they call it homework or not. So there might be some, language, cultural issues going on there for such a low number. I would say it's probably, much, much, much higher than that. So, and I would say the 42% who work with others on an individual assignment, a lot of that's probably copying from each other, right? So you take these with a grain of salt, but the point is that you're going to have cheating. In your school, you're going to have cheating in your classes, and that's just a fact of life. And so what has been our traditional approach? What is the most common approach that we see across college and university campuses, both here in the US and elsewhere? It's this kind of, I call it a rule compliance approach, which means that we state the rules and we expect people to comply with them. And this really leads to three different strategies. Prevention is the first one, where we employ technology like Turnitin.com or video cameras or biometric screenings, online proctoring, to try and beat the students with technology to technology. And so my mentor who got me into this is a political scientist, and so he would call it, the technological arms race. And we talk about that in Cheating in School, that we're never going to win the technological arms race against students because they're younger and they're going to be more up on technology than we are, and they'll always find a way, right? So right now we're concerned about Apple Watches. Pretty soon Google Glasses will look like regular glasses and they'll be very affordable. Are you going to tell students that they can't wear their glasses in an exam, right? So the technological arm race is not going to get us anywhere. But that's what the traditional approach focuses on. It also focuses on policing, so heavy proctoring, monitoring bathroom breaks, and then punishment. So the 3 Ps we used to call it. It's kind of where we criminalize behaviors. We talk about first strike causes, UVA is probably the most famous for this. Their honor code has a one-strike policy, so you could get dismissed from the university for plagiarizing a paragraph. Heavy sanctions, punishment for bystander behaviors. In other words, if you don't tell when there's on other students when they've cheated, you're as much in violation as other people. So these 3 Ps haven't really been effective, right? They came into being in the 70s in the United States. I talk about the history of this in the first book that was mentioned. And, you know, it was kind of this, this reaction to the protests that were on campus at that time, that we started reacting in a crime, and, you know, we're going to treat students like adults, so let's treat them like adults. We're going to prevent police and punish. And those just lead to faculty anger. You might hear some faculty talk like this. It might lead to faculty-student animosity where people don't trust each other. And you also get a lot of faculty resistance. So you get a lot of faculty saying, I don't want to deal with cheating because I'm not a cop. I became an educator, not a police officer. I don't want, or on the flip side of that, I don't want to be the one to ruin the student's career. So the 3 Ps don't traditionally work. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have some elements of prevention or punishment, but if that's the only approach, if that's the only way in which we deal with cheating, then it's not usually successful. So what can you do? I suggest what I call a teaching and learning approach, and that has 4 strategies. And I'm going to talk a bit about each of them. Communicating integrity, creating space for integrity. I'll touch briefly on this one. I probably won't have enough time for infusing integrity into the curriculum, and then leveraging the cheating moment as a teachable moment. And that last one is key, because no matter what else I tell you to do, if you do it all and you do it perfectly, you're still going to have students cheat in your class, because students are human beings, and human beings make some pretty bad decisions, especially when they're under stress, when they're pressured, when they're tired. And so you could be the quote-unquote perfect faculty member, and you will still have the occasional cheating in your class. So what's important there is that we leverage that as a teachable moment, right? So let's talk about communicating integrity. Why on earth do we have to communicate integrity at the university level, right? We have a lot of faculty say, but these students are adults, they've had 12 years of schooling experience before they get to me. Why am I having to communicate this? Well, here's why. Again, from the same study that I showed you earlier, the 80,000 North American students, not as many North American faculty, but a few thousand. You can see on this chart, not only is there a lack of consensus amongst the students as to which behaviors constitute cheating, there isn't even consensus among the faculty, right? So if we have a gap within our own ranks in terms of our agreement of what is considered cheating, that means that in my class, what I say is cheating is different than what you're going to say in your class. So obviously that causes confusion for the students. And then amongst the students, if you look at the gap between us and the students, it's huge, right? So we can't assume that students are on the same page as us. We can't assume that every student in our class is a future PhD in our discipline, and therefore they're just going to be fully into learning. We can't assume that they share the same ideas, the same upbringing as us, the same background, whatever, right? And so we have to articulate our unarticulated assumptions. Otherwise, they'll assume that they can do whatever they want in order to get the work done, right? And you'll assume that they're following your rules that you haven't even stated clearly. So it's quite important that we articulate, we communicate integrity and what we mean by that. I encourage you to use this definition from the International Center for Academic Integrity. And you'll notice right away that this definition is positive, right? If you talk to students, you ask them to define academic integrity, most of the time they'll say it's plagiarizing, it's cheating, it's, you know, they'll talk about it in the negative, and you'll find even amongst your peers, some of them will talk about the negative. And of course that starts the conversation off at a really bad place, a really not a nice educative space to be in. It starts off with that 3 Ps, preventing, policing, and punishment type of space. And so we want to talk about it as a positive thing, as an aspiration, as something we try to be, even though we might not always be successful at it. And so this is a basic definition. I then go on with my students and I talk to them about, okay, what does being honest, respectful, responsible, fair, and trustworthy mean for you as a student in this class? And what does it mean for me or my instructional team in this class? So I don't just talk to them about, you must be honest. That means that you must work on your own assignments, or you must acknowledge all your sources. But then I also talk about what I need to do. I'm going to show you that in a little bit. So a clear academic integrity statement, you're going to talk about the what, why, where, and how of academic integrity. You're going to be very explicit, and you're going to talk about what are considered integrous behaviors in your class and what are considered cheating behaviors in this class. Having said that, you can't list possibly everything that a student might do that would be cheating in your class. And so it always has to come back to having them make their own decisions. Am I being honest in this work? Once you've given them parameters, you can teach them how to ask themselves, is what I'm about to do honest? Is what I'm about to do responsible? Is it fair? And so they can make their own decisions. But still, you should be very clear on the common behaviors that students are confused about. You know, do they commonly, again, work with other people on assignments without acknowledging that? Do they commonly copy solutions out of problems in the back of the textbook? So those are the kinds of things you want to talk to them about, because if they're common in the student culture, they're going to do them if you don't say anything, right? So when you think about, I always use the example of jaywalking. When I go to San Francisco, I jaywalk because everybody else is doing it. I look around, I'm going to get pushed off the sidewalk if I don't walk, right? And so I do it there. When I go to Singapore, nobody's doing it. And I've heard tell of what happens if you do it, so I don't jaywalk in Singapore, right? So students are the same way. If you don't talk about it at all and they see other people doing the very things you don't want them to do and they're not hearing it be addressed, they're going to do it as well. That's just human nature. That's what we do. So you need to talk about that, the what. You need to talk about why. Okay, so this shouldn't just be, well, I'm saying this because Tyler University gives me a statement on academic integrity that I must, then they say I must put it in my syllabus. You know, students respond to authenticity. So why? Why do you care about academic integrity and professional integrity? I know we have some, for example, nursing faculty, I believe, that are present. You know, it's so much easier in some of those disciplines like medicine or engineering, any of those applied disciplines, to talk about how academic integrity links up to professional integrity and discipline integrity. And I'm going to show you some slides later that might help with that. But why do you care about it? You know, why does Tyler care about it? Why do you care about it? Why does your discipline care about it? Why the student should care about it? A discussion is great, but if you can't have a discussion with them, at least give an authentic explanation of why this matters. Point them out to where they can find legitimate information and help. There is so much help on the internet. You've got StackFlow Exchange, you've got CourseHero.com, you got Chike.com, you got Freelancer.com. Those are just naming the 4 major sites where students can go and not only get help from other people, they can get them to do their assignments for them for very, very low prices. And this ranges from a simple problem set for a homework assignment that may only be worth 10 points to their thesis, to their dissertation. So, and the reason why they're doing it, frankly, is because they're starting their assignments at 9 p.m. You know, they're working on their assignments from 9 p.m. till 4 a.m. And I can imagine most of you are not available during that time to help students. And so they are making bad decisions because they have nowhere else to turn. So I would not only talk to students about the legitimate places they can go for help on Tyler's campus, virtually or otherwise, but also how to avoid getting themselves into that situation in the first place, right? We know that students cheat. One reason, it's complex, but one reason why students cheat is poor metacognitive skills. So, you know, they'll get an assignment, they'll be like, oh, I can do that in, you know, 5 minutes. So I'm just going to leave that in my priority list and I'm going to leave that till the night before it's due. And then they sit down and try and do it and they realize they can't do it, right? And that's when they turn to these online sources. So helping students understand their own skills and abilities, maybe doing some pre-testing at the beginning of the term to show them how little they know or how hard the subject matter is going to be, will then help them back this stuff up, you know, start it earlier so that they can get help from legitimate on-site sources instead of at the last minute. And then particularly how you're going to handle violations of academic integrity. Hopefully you'll handle them according to the university policies and you have someone coming in after me to talk to you about that. But it is important that you handle them. Again, I have faculty say, I don't want to be a cop. I'm an educator. And that's exactly what my point. I want you to handle academic integrity violations as an educator, right? Because if students cheat, they're going to learn something from your response or your lack of response, right? And so if you don't respond, they're going to learn, hey, this is an acceptable strategy for getting things done. That's one of the things they're going to learn. If you do respond, they're going to learn it's not acceptable, and they're going to learn there's consequences for their choices. That will serve them better in the long term, right? When they're out in the field in their profession, where they're going to get fired or disciplined for the same behaviors. So handling it now is part of being an educator, and it can be, as I say later, leveraged as a teachable moment. Something else the research shows us is that if people affirm their integrity right before they're given an opportunity to cheat, cheating goes down. And this is because we can disassociate our sense of self as a good person from our actions. So the Josephson Institute, which surveys tens of thousands of high school students every couple of years, has found while just over 50% of them admit to cheating at least once a year, 93% of them believe they have good morals and ethics. So it shows you that their behaviors do not line up with their conception of self as a good person. And so helping remind people of that is very interesting. If you've never seen Dan Ariely's work, there's a citation there. Just Google him, frankly, and watch some of his TED Talks. It's a lot of his research that feeds into this. He even just had people read the 10 Commandments before they were given an opportunity to cheat. Even if they weren't Christian, it didn't matter. It reduced cheating from people who didn't have to read anything about morality or integrity right before. So have them affirm their integrity. You can do it with a pledge. Tyler could have a common pledge, which is what we do here, and then a short reminder that students would write on every assignment and exam. Keeping in mind that if students have to write the statement and sign it, it actually has more impact than if they just sign a statement. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so that was communicating integrity. On to creating space for integrity. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's not just about the students and them being honest, responsible, respectful, fair, or trustworthy. It's about you being so as well. So role modeling is one great way to create space for integrity. There's nothing that's going to inspire cheating more than an unfair professor. A professor who changes assignments at the last minute, who asks exam questions that you never covered in class, for content you never covered in class, who says they're going to get their assignments and graded exams back in a week and it takes them a month, right? So we have to think about role modeling the fairness, responsibility, respect, trustworthiness, and honesty that we expect from our students. Big one right up here, right? How many people do you know, maybe even yourself, who do not always cite your sources in lecture? Really critical that we do that. We can't expect students to cite their sources if we don't cite our own. So think about think about the things that you maybe could improve in this area. We all have something that we could improve in this area. I'm constantly finding myself missing some of these things or not attending to them. And I think it's just being conscious of this and being really respectful of it. So this is how I communicate. One way I communicate integrity, obviously several ways to my students, but this is the way I mentioned earlier, right? I have the values on the side. This one doesn't have courage. I've updated it to include courage. What this means for the students, and what this means for the instructional team. I do it this ahead, and I just put it in my syllabus because in my class, the students themselves come up with their code of ethics. They work in teams, and so they come up with a code of ethics for their team. So they then do this. If you're not going to have code of ethics for your teams, you could do this as a class. It's amazing that your students will come up with the same list of behaviors that you would have, because they really do, as a group, know the right thing to do, and it comes across better when they come up with it than when they're told to do it by you, right? So when they feel like, as a class, we want this for ourselves and from each other, then it becomes a living document rather than something on a piece of paper that you tried to feed to the students. So I would encourage you to do this. Really easy to do. You can also create space for integrity by considering alternative pedagogies. I have an article out in a recent Theory to Practice. Theory to Practice is a thematic journal. And so the current one, or maybe it's not the current one anymore, is on academic integrity. And I have a whole article in there about how teaching and learning pedagogies, how the research shows that they can reduce cheating and increase integrity. So I encourage you to seek that out. But anyway, so there's a lot of research that shows us that alternative pedagogies to the traditional based banking model of education with the lecture being fed to the students actually can reduce cheating. Caveat, a lot of faculty are using clickers with peer instruction now. Without talking about integrity, that can really invite cheating. We have students who bring multiple clickers into class to click in for their friends, right? So there are some caveats there, but generally speaking, the more active the learning, the more they're doing in the class around their learning and the producing of their assessments, obviously the less cheating you're going to have happen, and frankly the more fun teaching and learning is. And rethink your assignments. Really take an honest look at your assignments, and are they measuring what you think they are, right? We often we'll tell employers, we'll tell society that this degree means that Trisha Bertram-Gallant has a certain level of independent knowledge and abilities and a certain discipline. But if my assignments didn't really feed into that, if my assignments really measured more, can I copy and paste? Can I work with others? You know, are your assignments lined up to your learning objectives? So take a good look at that. Are they easy to cheat on? Am I assigning problem sets out of the textbook that students can easily copy from the solutions manual, for example? Are they necessary? Sometimes we're giving assignments that aren't necessary, just to give students points or just to give students grades. When I first started teaching, I had read that the more assignments, the more opportunities you have for students to get grades, the less likely they'll cheat. My students were miserable. They actually said to me, everything we do is for points. It's exhausting. And they hated it. They hated it. And so I changed that. And they still got lots of opportunities to, mess up, drop your lowest score, so I reduced temptations to cheat, but it was overdone the other way. So are the assignments necessary? Are they really linked to learning? If we are giving students opportunities to earn points by doing things that aren't connected to our learning objectives, like showing up at class attendance, then we might be encouraging what I call grade grubbing, which is trying to get points by whatever means necessary. Now, maybe attending class is highly connected to learning, and you've got a learning objective that shows that, in our profession, discipline and showing up is really important, and so that's part of your learning objective, then that's great. But if it's just to give students points, that contributes to a transactional environment, right? A performance-oriented environment, which students will perform in order to get a grade, but it's not necessarily connected to learning. And again, research shows that performance-oriented environments are much more likely to result in cheating than mastery-oriented environments. Mastery-oriented environments, the assignments and the class activities are focused on helping the students master the material, not just get points. So just thinking about that in terms of how are you giving points away. And of course, we should reduce opportunities and temptations for cheating. Now, having said that, I want to be really clear that this is a fine balance, right? So if we don't want to graduate people from Tyler who didn't cheat because they never had the opportunity, right? Because we could do that. We could, you could frisk all the students as they're walking into an exam, make them turn over all their cell phones and Apple Watches and everything. You could lock down their browsers during all exams. You could do all sorts of things to eliminate cheating, but then you've created a jail-like state. And I don't think we want that in education. You've also created then a bunch of graduates who don't know how to self-regulate their own behavior. So we want to graduate graduates who did not cheat even though they had the opportunity, but they chose not to. So it's at the same time, we don't want to overly tempt students, right? So you know, we pack them into exam situations like sardines, right next to each other, and then we say, don't look at the other person's paper, for example. Well, that's a little much. So how do we reduce those temptations and opportunities in a way that's still kind of realistic and reflective of the real world, so that we're still having them have to develop self-regulation and self-discipline and choosing not to cheat, even though there is still an opportunity? Does that make sense? It's a fine line, right? So with plagiarism, I think you should use something like Turnitin.com or some other kind of tool, just because that really cuts down on workload for you in terms of finding, you know, what a student may have plagiarized from. When you read a paper, if you're reading it well, you can tell when a student's plagiarized for the most part, but Turnitin helps cut down the workload of Googling and finding those sources. Thing about Turnitin or other tools like that, there's a debate on whether you should allow students to see the report. Do you use Turnitin there, I should ask?
We do.
Okay, so there's a debate about whether students should be able to see the originality report before they submit their paper, so they can fix their errors. I would tread really carefully with that with novice writers. So if you're working with students who have been writing for a long time, I think you can do that, and they can do that independently. I personally do it for my own writing because I don't want to miss a citation, but when I do it, I know I'm looking for missed citations. When students who are novice writers see that, one, they panic, right? Two, if they don't really know what they're doing yet in terms of paraphrasing and citation, they're mostly going to focus on using a thesaurus to change some words so that Turnitin doesn't pick up the plagiarism anymore. And so if you're going to let students see the reports, the originality reports, it should be as a teachable moment, which means they should be doing it with a member of the instructional team, so that you can go over it with them and explain to them what you're looking at and why it's problematic. I would not just give it to them and say, you know, help yourself. It's not creating a good learning moment. So there's a caveat there. Be really clear with citation and attribution rules. I got this last bullet point, this focus on the spirit, not the technicalities of citation, from a graduate student in Singapore at Nanyang Technological University. She said this to me and I thought it was brilliant, right? We so focus on MLA or APA or whatever the style guidelines is your department uses, and dinging students for where the period is or what is italicized and what is capitalized and what isn't, which frankly, sorry if there's any English instructors in the room, a little ridiculous for most of our students, because they're not going to be academics. They're not going to be writing papers that require that kind of citation. What they are going to require, no matter what profession they end up in, is honest attribution, right? When they're talking, they're honestly attributing, hey, my coworker and I just came up with an idea to save the hospital $1 million, not, hey, I came up with an idea to save the hospital $1 million, right? So it's in that kind of context, but also in terms of writing memos or interpreting research. They really need to know how to honestly just attribute ideas to other people rather than what to underline and what to italicize. So focusing on the spirit of citation brings students in. It's easier for them to understand than if we focus on the technicalities of citation. Another big area is unauthorized collaboration or aid. So be very explicit on what assignments must be completed totally independently, and make sure that's connected to your learning objectives and there's a real reason for that, and what can be done collaboratively. Most importantly, again, teach students honest collaboration. If you do say to students, hey, you can work with other students on this assignment or this homework or whatever, but what you submit must be your own work in your own words, that's really confusing. I can't work with other people and then submit something in my own work in my own words. It's not possible. So be clear on what you mean by work with, and usually what faculty mean when they say that is talk about the concepts of the course, talk about the readings, but don't do the assignment together. But that's not what you said, so make sure you're clear on what you're saying. But also, if you do allow them to do that, have them acknowledge who they worked with. So if I'm working with Johnny on this assignment and I write, I worked with Johnny on this assignment, or even give Johnny a shout out, because he gave me a particular idea. So I give him a little footnote right at that idea in my paper. And then you get our two papers and you can say, wow, Johnny and Tricia admitted they worked together, but they crossed the line on this one. You can have a different conversation with them because you're no longer having a conversation about them being dishonest. You're having a conversation with them about what does it mean to collaborate. It doesn't mean Johnny does problem one and Tricia does problem two, right? So you can have a very different conversation with them at that point. It's a nicer conversation. It's more about learning than it is about cheating. And so having them acknowledge who they've worked with teaches them just about honest collaboration, which they will need in the world of work. I'm tired of talking for a second. Can we take questions for a couple minutes about communicating or creating space? If there are any, rather than waiting till the end.
Yeah, I have a question. Regarding this slide, unauthorized collaboration aid, the last point says, be clear on use of all examinations.
Mm-hmm.
You elaborate a little bit on that because students are always, at least in my course in engineering, I get them an exam and my older students keep the exam and they pass it to the other students. And I am aware of that. So I don't understand, be clear on the use of the all examination. What do you mean?
Great. Yeah, good question. So if you give your exams back to your students, you know, like you just said, they're going to pass them around, right? So you should make them available to all students on your website or in your Blackboard or, you know, your LMS system. Otherwise, some students are going to get them and some students aren't. And that creates a sense of unfairness amongst the students. I've had a number of anonymous complaints to my office about students who found out right before an exam that other students had access to old exams and they didn't have them. So, you know, you're relying on cultural capital at that point, right, for students. Like if they know people or they're connected, or they know these sites like Course Hero exist where all of your old exams are going to be posted. If they don't know that, they feel really like they were scammed, like they haven't, the other students have an unfair advantage. So if you're gonna give your exams back to students, you might as well make all of your old exams available, and frankly your old answer keys, because if you post your answer keys, they're distributing those as well. They're up on websites, they're being handed down. Make them all available to all students so it creates a fair environment. If you don't want them distributing your stuff, you can't hand them back. You can't post them because they will. I do encourage you to put copyright on all of your stuff that you hand out to students, and include the phrase, please do not distribute without permission, because some students just honestly don't know that they shouldn't be distributing your intellectual property on websites. They distribute them because they get credit, and then when they use that credit then to have people write their papers for them or solve their assignments for them or just to download other professors' intellectual property. So I think you should do that. I think you should be clear on what you expect from students in terms of passing those around. But if you're going to hand them back, they are going to pass them around. A note on exams. I get this argument but students learn from looking at what they did wrong. I would say that most students do not. I would say that a small percentage, those who are going to be PhDs, are going to be able to learn from looking at the exams by themselves. Everybody else is going to need some help with that. So I would say let students look at exams with you. Ideally, for learning, let students look at exams with you or a TA in office hours so you can go over what they did wrong and what happened. If you can't do that because of time, numbers in the class, then you could use something like GradeSource or CrowdMark. You can return the exams on those platforms. Make sure you're complying with university FERPA guidelines around that. You can return exams on that platform. They can request regrades, and you don't have to worry about students altering exams for regrade either. So those are some options. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions about communicating integrity or creating space for integrity?
I have another one, it's nobody else. I used to give my students homework. And I always tell the students, I'm not gonna grade the homework. but the home, you have to turn in the homework if you want to take the quiz.
Yeah.
So the student take the quiz, they have done the homework, and sometimes I just put exactly the same problem on the homework, and they are not able to solve it. Should I consider that cheating? Or how can I handle that situation? Because sometimes they even want partial credit.
Yeah.
You did the homework, you did it right. How you are expecting me to give you something? Can you help me how to handle fairly that situation?
So you're saying they do it right on the homework, but they can't do it on the exam?
Yes.
Yeah. So they cheated on the homework. Is your point?
Yes.
Yeah.
How should I handle it? Give it zero or give it a chance or?
I don't think you need to label that cheating, right? Because you're not grading the homework. And so they're not attempting to get a grade by means other than honest effort. They're just cheating themselves at that point. What I would do is give them statistics, right? So every time you teach that class, I would give them stats from previous classes to show that students who cheated, when students cheat on the homework because they can't solve the exact same problems on the exam, and show how the students who do the homework do better on the exams. If you can show that kind of data, then that shows the students that the reason why they should do homework honestly is to master the material and to learn versus performance, right? And they're not achieving either. They're not achieving mastery or performance. But I applaud you for not grading those homeworks, because that's just giving points away. That's giving students points for copying and pasting. So I think that's the right way to do it, but you need to give the students some data to show them why you're doing it that way. But at that point, those students who cheated on the homework and then failed the exam, hopefully they learn from that.
Trisha, can you see the question that was just asked on the Zoom chat?
If I open it up, yep. Any thoughts on providing answers on quizzes after due date is passed? Students are able to take on their own and use notes but not a peer. If we don't want quiz answers distributed, should we not provide correct answers? Well, yeah, if you don't want your quiz answers distributed, you should definitely not provide the right answers. I'm not sure if that's, what I tell faculty, generally speaking, the general rule is do what's good for learning, and most of the time that's what's good for integrity as well. I don't want you to change pedagogy just to stop cheating. I want you to change pedagogy or assessments in order to enhance and facilitate learning and your honest and fair assessment of that learning. So that's the context in which I want you to think about some of the questions you have. If you're going to provide answers after quizzes, then like I said, you could use CrowdMark or GradeSource. That will help you do that. They can still take screenshots and distribute them, of course. If that's your worry, then you need to do it in class or in office hours with students. I don't know that, again, maybe you have some studies. I haven't seen any studies that prove that sharing the answer key helps with learning. So think about it in those terms. What is the best thing for learning? Somebody else asked, are there ways to apply these principles when courses are 100% online? Absolutely. So I think in online courses, you do need to use one of those online proctoring systems. I just think it's, in that sense, it's kind of irresponsible not to. But we have the exact same principles working online. And we also, and I can share this with Nicole, and she can distribute, we also have something called Trusted Seal, which is a rubric intentionally designed for online classes and programs to employ best integrity practices. So I'm happy to share that with Nicole and she can send that out. But yes, the principles remain the same. There's no proof that there's more cheating online classes than in-person classes. It depends on the size, right? If you've got a class of 400 students, which I don't think you do there, the students are just as anonymous as in an online class. So I like to remind people that cheating can happen in a face-to-face class almost as easily as it can in the online classes. Okay, let's keep going for a second. Thank you for your questions. Okay, so we've talked about communicating integrity, creating space for integrity, and now we want to talk about, just briefly, because this is, what I'm giving you 4 strategies I've done in a 2-day workshop, right? So keep that in mind. but infusing integrity. So this is your opportunity to not just talk about integrity on the first day, but to talk about it throughout the term. And this really depends on your comfort level, and you may not want to do this at all, which is why I'm not going to cover it too intensely. But some ways you can do this, some pretty easy ways you can do this. An exercise I call decoding integrity. So basically you give the students, well, what I have students do is I have them look up a code of ethics from a professional organization they want to join. And then I have them read the International Center for Academic Integrity's Fundamental Values document, freely available online. It talks about the 6 values: honesty, respect, responsibility, trustworthiness, fairness, and courage. And I get them to look at those codes of ethics for those values. The reason why this is important is it helps them see that we're not just talking about academics here, that these values are valued by organizations and professions everywhere. And that helps them kind of get a grip on this, that this is a big deal, this is important in life, and this is something they want to care about. Here, a couple of professors have written what they called an academic and professional integrity primer. It's like the early reading in the course, where they talk about, for example, we have a physics lab here that biology students have to take. Biology students hate having to take physics labs. And so we wrote a primer to help students understand, because majority of our bio students want to be in the health professions, so help them understand how physics, not only the content, but the skills they're learning in lab are relevant and related to being a health professional. And then we do that's their first reading, and then there's a first reading quiz in response to that. You could develop and have the students develop and analyze their own ethical dilemma case study. One of the big mistakes that we make as faculty in trying to talk about ethics with students is we start big. Like for engineering, we start with like NASA or Chernobyl or something huge, right? That just is way too far out there for students to really identify with. And so having them think about an own ethical dilemma they're having in your class, for example, working with other people, there's going to be a million of them, they could analyze that. Finding stuff in the news related to your discipline, related to your profession, and also related to ethics. Include ethics or integrity questions in every class, on every quiz, however you want to do that. I have a computer science professor who, this works as well. On every assignment, he's got some meta-analysis, right? Learning questions about how did you complete this assignment? How do you, what do you think about the process you used in completing this assignment? Then he adds some ethics questions. Did you do this, I don't know what the exact questions are, but something like, did you do this alone? If not, who did you work with and how did that go? So just getting students to think about their process for completing their assignments is a way for them to think about integrity and ethics. And I mentioned this earlier, creating a class or team code of ethics is really quite easy to do. I can send Nicole a template that she can distribute if you'd like that. But it's a really easy way for students to think about this. And like I said, define the ethics for the class in the same way you would have done anyways. And I already mentioned this, start where they are. Don't start with Chernobyl or NASA. Start with academic and move. The best case scenarios, this occurs throughout the program. So in engineering, you start with academic integrity in their first year, but by 4th year, they are looking at things like Volkswagen and NASA and Chernobyl. Okay, so communicating integrity, creating space for integrity, infusing integrity in the curriculum, and as I mentioned earlier, students are still going to cheat because they're human beings who mess up. And frankly, you're going to have some cheaters in your school, right? So we talk about how the majority of students we throw out 95%, an unfounded, unsubstantiated claim, but it works for us. 95% of our students are good people who've made a bad decision under stress pressure when they're tired, and 5% are cheaters, right? And because again, they're representative of the human population. So you are going to have some of those. I'm not talking about those today. I'm talking about the 95%. Leverage the cheating moment as a teachable moment. Really important. How do we do that? Well, by responding. I mentioned that earlier. I mentioned how it's about educating and not about policing. It mimics the real world. And I'm going to show you some stats that there's consequences for cheating. It changes their perceptions of acceptable behaviors. Again, if I if I know that this professor cares about academic integrity and does respond to cheating, I'm less likely to do it. Students talk about you on Reddit, they talk about you and rate your professor, and they talk about whether you allow cheating or not. So you can develop a reputation that will be very helpful. And it will reduce cheating in your class, and it changes the larger university culture. Faculty often talk to me about, well, is the university doing this, this, and this? We could do everything perfectly at the university level, but if on the individual class level where cheating happens, things aren't happening, then we're just blowing it hot air. You know, it doesn't mean anything. What really matters is what's happening in the ground in their peer culture and in the culture of your classes. And most importantly, I think it allows students to fail and learn, right? We don't allow students to fail much anymore. That's problematic because we see a lot of students with lack of resiliency. They can't get themselves back up after messing up. And so it's really important that we give students an opportunity to do that. A quick story to show you what I'm talking about. So I had a student who was in a class that we teach for students who have violated our policy. And they don't have to talk about their violation in the class. We talk about ethics and ethical decision making. But afterwards, she stayed and she said, I want to tell you why I'm here. I said, okay. And she said, so I wrote my paper and I sent it home to my mom like I always do. And when it came back from my mom, it was really different. It was really different. I said to my mom, you didn't go on the internet for any of this stuff, did you? Because my mom loves to go on the internet. And she said, no, but Turnitin said it's 40% plagiarized. And by this time, she's got tears rolling down her face. And so I said, what's the lesson learned? And she said, check the work my mom does. And she wasn't being sassy. She was crying. All her life, I find out, her mother made her send her papers to her before she submitted them. All her life. She just thought this is what you do. And I said to her, you know what? That's not the lesson I want you to learn from this. What I want you to learn is we don't care if your mother can write. And clearly she can't because she had to plagiarize. We care whether you can write. We care what you think. We care if you're developing your ability to communicate what you think. We care if you're understanding the material, if you're learning all this stuff. And I swear to God, I could see a light bulb go off over her head. It's like no one had ever talked about mastery before. All she'd heard all her life was about performance. And so she was doing the things to perform. And I don't know what happened to that girl, but I think it tells you a couple things. One, a lot of the kids who cheat aren't cheaters, right? They're not trying to pull one over on you. They're not evil. They're not trying to make your life miserable. They're young people who are making some bad decisions based on a lot of factors, sometimes ignorance, sometimes parents, sometimes whatever. But it also tells you that students can learn afterwards. You know, that there's an opportunity for this to be a critical, teachable moment. So, when you respond to cheating, don't take it personally. There's a strange noise going on. I don't know if you all can hear it.
I'm sorry, there's lawnmowers outside.
Oh, okay. I meant to apologize at the beginning. We have the military jets fly over our school sometimes, and you have to. Okay. So don't take it personally, right? They're not cheating on you. It's not about you. It's about whatever's going on in their life. You're the adult. Don't take it personally. Respond calmly. Stop the behavior. If it's happening in an exam and you're watching it, stop it because the other students know what's going on and they want to see you stop it. Obviously, you stop it discreetly and with, you don't yell at a person and call them a cheater. You collect all the necessary documentation that led you to the suspicion of cheating, and you report it through your process, which you're going to hear about. And hopefully the university has some kind of consequences for the behavior, and hopefully maybe Tyler can have some ways to leverage it as a teachable moment as well. And you should give an academic penalty for cheating. You shouldn't grade an assignment on which there's cheating. Hopefully that's not out of bounds with your policies, but you shouldn't have to grade something if you think there was cheating on it. So yes, it takes some time. Good teaching takes time. And so I have faculty say, well, I'm not rewarded for this. I'm rewarded for publication or what have you. And that's something for the institution to handle. But it does take a little bit of time, but that's what education requires. So I'd encourage you to think about occasional cheating not being a bad thing. I try and go around the world and tell faculty to be excited when someone cheats in their class because it's such a great opportunity for learning. It's a better way of looking at it than, you know, looking at it as a problem or an issue or a bad student that you have to fix. It's just an opportunity for learning, that's all. So before we get into the last questions, I just want to pose some stats that help you understand why this matters. So I mentioned Josephson Institute earlier, 7,000 people surveyed, people who cheat in school are more likely to cheat as adults. So, you know, that's important to keep in mind that we are shaping their later actions by responding to cheating or not responding to cheating. These are just some of the stats. I like this bottom one. People who cheat in school are 1.5 times more likely to lie to a spouse. So keep that in mind. You're not only helping their profession, you're helping their marriage later on. Then we know that ethical fitness takes practice. It's developed over time. This is not an issue about people being bad or good, and you have no control over that as a university professor. This is about good ethical decision making. It's about choosing between two rights. It's not about teaching people how to be good people. So don't think about it like that. Ethical decision making is a skill just like the scientific method or any other skill you teach, and so it takes practice, it takes time, it takes exposure. So that's why it's important that we do this in university. And look, employers want graduates to have these skills, ethical judgment and integrity. But look at all these other skills that they want them to have. These are all related to why students cheat or what skills they're not developing when they cheat. So if they're cheating, they're not solving complex problems, whoops, right? If they're cheating, they're not applying knowledge and skills to real world critical thinking. So, you know, you want to make sure that students are developing all these skills, which means that they have to be acting with integrity. And then look at the top 6 reasons why new college hires are disciplined or fired. Unethical behavior is right up there, but all these other things, again, are reasons why students cheat or are a result of students cheating, right? I can't communicate effectively because I cheated on all my assignments in writing. I cheated on all my assignments. Somebody else wrote all my papers for me. So those students are going to get disciplined or fired, and so the university didn't do them any service by allowing them to cheat their way through school. So that's why it's so important that we do something about this, that we create environments in which cheating will be the exception and integrity the norm, and when cheating does happen, that we respond so that they will become better ethical citizens and professionals. So that's it, and we still have about 8 minutes for more questions. I know, it's a lot of information. Thoughts, questions, challenges?
So I have a question. So when you, at your university, when you catch a student cheating, then they automatically go into some type of training or?
Yeah, we're actually just changing our sanctioning guidelines to be implemented this fall. Our quarter doesn't start till the end of September. And so every student gets some form of AI training. We do charge them $50. And we have something called an academic integrity seminar. It's not the same one that you can find online, where we teach them ethical decision making. A lot get assigned to that. We have a collaboration workshop. The library teaches strategies and tools to prevent plagiarism, which is more about citing and paraphrasing, that kind of thing. And then our writing center director teaches a writing from sources workshop for students who have been reported for plagiarism. So depending on what their violation was, will lead to different, different workshops or training opportunities.
Thank you.
Other questions? It's hard. Normally I would ask you questions, but I can barely see your faces. Well, I guess I could if I stop sharing, then your screen will be bigger. Is there something that I've covered today that you think, one thing that you could implement this term coming up?
There's a lot of things that you covered that I think, at least for me, made me kind of reflect on, how I teach my courses. and, you know, what kinds of things I put on my papers, you know, I'm probably gonna have to watch the PowerPoint again
Yeah.
to reflect upon those.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think if there's one thing, if you only did one thing, I would, depending on the nature of your class, if you have out of class assignments that students do, I would stress the honest collaboration piece.
You know, I put it in my syllabus, and I read the syllabus, and I talk about it, but I still have students who, I've had one student who just plagiarized the entire paper. I mean, just took the entire thing off the internet and turned it in.
Yeah.
When I read it, I knew that the writing was way better than anything I could have ever done. And
Yeah.
so it kind of raised a red flag. You know, then you have those conversations about, you know, with the student. But in the big scheme of things, you know, I wonder, you know, could I have done more? Of course, she didn't get a grade. In our area, they get paperwork that gets filled out and goes in their folders and, you know, different things. But I just, you know, I reflect back on that. Maybe I could have done more in the front end.
To prevent?
Yeah.
Probably not in that case. I mean, it's hard to know without knowing the student situation, but when they've copied an entire paper, that usually means they got a lot going on, and either it means they're part of the 5%ers who are going to cheat no matter what you do, or they've got so much going on in their life that, you know, unless you were helping them deal with all of that, which you're not going to do as a faculty member, then it probably would have happened. And so that's why I always say, like, don't take it personally when a student does cheat, regardless of what you do. It's something this is going to sound a bit hokey perhaps, but, you know, it's something that maybe had to happen for them to truly learn and to truly reflect on their life and what's going on. I've now seen over 6,000 cases of cheating. And I've seen students who frankly were thankful that they got caught and reported, because it finally made them deal with the stuff that they were not dealing with that was leading them to cheat. So this is not always a bad thing. This can really be the thing that needed to happen to get the student to realize they're in the wrong major, or they're not dealing with some life issues they need to deal with before they can proceed, or they're at the wrong school, or whatever.
I know that some of this that happens, at least in my colleagues in my classes, seems like it has to do a lot of times more with certain ethnicities or certain cultures. Do you find that happens as well, or do you see it just across the board?
So we see it across the board. I would say that our students that have been to school all their life in America have just as of a diverse background in terms of academic integrity as our students coming from overseas. We've got some high schools that do a really good job of academic integrity, and we got majority of high schools that don't, right? And so I would say the majority of students you have walking into your door have used cheating as a way now and then, or more regularly, to get stuff done, because their schools have not responded to it in a way to discourage that behavior. So that would be the first thing. Second thing I would say is, if you have students who are coming from other countries in which English was not their first language, they are going to struggle more in their academics than somebody whose whose native language is English. And so thinking about, what is our admissions like? Is our admission standards high enough to enable these students to succeed with integrity in terms of their TOEFL score or what have you? Is there integrity in the admissions process? And then once they get to the university, are there enough support mechanisms for them as second language, third language, fourth language learners to enable them to succeed with integrity in courses that are expecting a very high level of English communication skills in terms of writing, especially, right? So if you're trying to write in your second, third, or fourth language, you're going to have a harder time. And so we have to think about those kind of support mechanisms. We also have, just in general, again, students coming from high schools where plagiarism was not emphasized, right? It wasn't discouraged, it wasn't punished. And so they've always just used other people's words. Now, when they're copying a whole paper, there's no culture they're coming from where that is acceptable. They might have come from a culture where that wasn't punished, right? There's a difference. You know what I mean? There's a difference between it being acceptable and people allowing that to happen and it not being morally reprehensible versus it's morally reprehensible, but I'm going to look the other way because of cultural, we're just not doing that here at this high school. So I've not met a student who thought it was okay to submit somebody's work as their own. When you get right down to it, a whole paper like that. So it's probably more stuff was going on in their life that they're not dealing with and they panicked. And it's bad ethical decision making. So I say to students, what's your ethical alternative for copying an entire paper from something? They can't think of not handing it in, asking for a late submission, asking for help, taking the hit on the grade by just doing the best that you can do, even though it's not going to be very good. When they're in a panic mode or they're distressed or they're pressured, human beings, can't think logically through these things sometimes. And so what could you have done? Maybe you could be more approachable. I don't know. You seem pretty approachable to me. Maybe, is it a type of assignment that's easy to copy, right? Is it a personal assignment? Is it more authentic? Does it feel meaningful to students? I don't know. But most likely in that particular case, there's probably not much you could do to prevent it. And that's the perfect situation for leveraging as a teachable moment for that particular student. Any other, see that it's 11 o'clock there. We're at any other questions? Is your next speaker there?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to take up his time.
Well, we really appreciate the presentation. It was great.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad I could join you. Let me know if you want any of the things that I mentioned. I can send them to Nicole.
Yes, please send them to me. And if you are okay with it, your presentation, I know we have some people trying to take notes, but I think they'd appreciate being able to go back and look at it.
Sure. Yeah, I know it's hard to, there's a lot, like I said, it's a lot of information.
Yeah, really good information. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right.
Bye, Trisha. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
You too.
Hey, David, you have the floor.
Oh, is it the test? Okay. Yeah, last time there was an active shooter, we were in this room and I was like, get the pole, it has a sharp. I was freaking.
All right, well, now I'm wishing I'd been able to get here sooner. That's really good information on
Yeah.
that. I know I've worked with a lot of y'all before. Some of you consider who weren't in the past. My name is Dave Hill. I'm the Director of Judicial Affairs. I handle student conduct. I can give y'all a quick, some of you I've talked to you about this before, some of y'all have worked with this before. The way we handle academic misconduct here gives a lot of flexibility to the faculty. Probably 90+% of the academic misconduct is handled directly by the faculty members. The one thing I do ask is that you contact me beforehand so I can check and make sure it's not someone that we've had issues with before. And I ask that you document it afterwards so that if it happens again, I've got a record of it. Basically, I mean, our policy goes into excruciating detail on what is and what's considered academic misconduct. Probably to kind of summarize again, the big three are cheating, unauthorized collaboration, and of course the big one is plagiarism. Cheating is anything that would give them an unfair advantage, and probably the best example of that is one we had about it tail of the last semester, of the spring semester. Student took a picture of the final in a chemistry lab and then began distributing this. We know at least one person got it because they let my office know. The problem was we couldn't tell who else had gotten it. And because they weren't smart enough to take the picture before they filled it out, we knew whose test it was. So they were able to follow up with that person. 2 entire sections of that class, though, had to retake the final because we couldn't show who else might have gotten it after that. They were able to change the final for the last section, but they made 2 entire sections retake it because the whole thing was compromised. And of course, that was a huge issue for anyone who'd already taken it because now, instead of preparing for other finals, they have to go back over the material. And they've got, if they did well the first time, they've got to hope it's over comparable material that they were already good at. But there was a good chance someone did well in the first one, had to retake it, and it was the stuff they didn't get as well. So that's kind of my go-to example now for here's how many people it can impact. Unauthorized collaboration, we don't see as much, but it's certainly there. And I think her advice on that was really good. Just be clear on what your expectations and requirements are. Plagiarism is far and away the one we see most often. And I have literally seen someone literally cut and paste an article out of USA Today, slap their name on it, and then have the nerve to act offended when we call them on it. More likely what you'll encounter is someone who doesn't know how to write a paper. I do think probably half or more of the cases we get are people that were never taught how to cite properly. I'm getting into a generational difference here. I was probably the very last generation where I actually brought a typewriter to campus with me. And then I left with a desktop. Research involved going to the library with a stack of 3x5 cards. It is so much easier now to go online, find documents, find articles, find scholarly journals, and cut and paste. And there's a weird mindset difference, is the best way I can describe it. I kind of go back to the Napster case, and a lot of us probably remember. Napster was an online file sharing service. People would upload their digital music and share it with other people. Oddly enough, some musicians took issue with this. In particular, the rock band Metallica did a reverse class action lawsuit and brought suit against about 10,000 of their fans. Now, my thought is, of that 10,000 people, I suspect fewer than 5% would have walked into Walmart or Best Buy or Hastings or wherever, picked up a Metallica CD, stuck it under their shirt, and walked out. There is a very different mindset, though, when you're sitting in your house, in your room, at your computer, with the internet access that you're paying for. It feels different. And we're getting into not the theft of physical property, but knowledge, information. And I think we have a different, my best theory is that there's a different mindset over who owns information. And that's been the issue with plagiarism as long as there's been writing, I think. But it's that much harder. It's something I think it's vital that you go over with your classes, why it's so important. You know, you don't necessarily care what someone on the internet knows. You care what they know. You care about the research they're able to do and that they're able to synthesize. I do think that probably a good half or more of the students that come through my office on plagiarism cases, they simply don't know how to write. They don't know how to do the citations. Sometimes that's obvious. If you get a paper where they've made a really good faith effort to cite and footnote everything, and then they miss one or two, that's probably carelessness. If you get one where they didn't do any, but they listed all the sources that appear, good chance that they don't know how to do the citations. The problem is we can't look into their hearts and minds. All we know is they turned in a paper that has that they're presenting as their work, but it's not cited. We don't have the quotes, we don't have the footnotes. Go over it with them ahead of time. I strongly recommend, especially if it's a first course, send them to the writing center. Recommend require that they have the writing center go over the paper with them beforehand. A lot of professors will have them turn in a first draft, and then they will note, if you turn it in like this, this is plagiarized, this is plagiarized, this is plagiarized. Come talk to me about it. Of course, in those cases, I have no sympathy if they don't catch that particular hint, then they come to me anyway. As far as the outcomes, the most common outcome, there's a lot of things that the outcome can be. It could be a warning. You can require them to resubmit the assignment, possibly for reduced credit. You can give them reduced credit on the assignment or reduced or failing credit on the class itself. Last time I ran the numbers, about 2/3 of the time, the outcome is a reduced or failing grade on the assignment. About 1/3 of the time, it's a straight up failing grade on the course. I think what most faculty do is they kind of look at how major is the assignment, and if it's a quiz that your total quiz grade is 5% of the course, they're more likely to do an F on that assignment. If it's a big major paper, they're more likely to do an F on the course. But some professors, if it's an F at all, if it's cheating at all, they want to make sure that they make a lasting impact and they do the F on the course. There's a lot of leeway on it. If you ever have questions, though, please feel free to give me a call. But that's usually what it comes down to. F for the assignment or F for the course. I do think that anything you can do to get the conversation going. A lot of students that come in my office with other conduct issues, a lot of times there is something else going on. I don't know how many times I've had students in for alcohol, for drugs, for other misconduct issues, and before as we're wrapping the conduct process up, I'm having to walk them down to the counseling center because other things start coming up. Sometimes it's directly related to what's happening on campus. Sometimes it's baggage they brought with them, things that happened long before they got here. But we do have a lot of hurt, broken people who come into our classes and are really stinking good at covering it up. I am shocked at how well some of them can put one foot in front of the other when I hear what the other stuff that's going on. Anything you can do to get in those conversations, though, I think is good. I think she's right. There a lot of times, I think you will get students who they get caught up. There's the better rapport you have with them beforehand, the more likely they are to be upfront with you about what happened. The plagiarism cases that have come to me, almost all of them have told me they turned in the wrong draft. I don't really buy that. One of the few exceptions was a student who had been a student worker in an office, and I had got to know her fairly well just because of some other things that had happened through her job there. Got to know her pretty well. When I had to call her in on a plagiarism case, she didn't even try. She was very upfront that it was a course she hadn't been following the material really well. She fallen behind in it. She panicked. She cut and pasted a bunch of stuff together. She's a fairly, and there were some other people involved that did the same thing. I don't know that she would have been as forthcoming if we didn't already have that report. So whatever you can do to build the rapport with the students, get them to help to trust you earlier up front, definitely helps. Questions? What else can I tell you all from the university side?
Jay,
Yes.
what influence, if any, do you think that having the honor code on syllabi and on assignment in different places on campus or wherever, or is there a way that we could use the honor code that may be more influential, so that way to prevent or minimize cheating?
That is a really good.
Academic integrity.
That is a really good question. It's something that I want to start incorporating when I'm meeting with the students when they get kicked over to me. I don't know a good way to incorporate it on the front end. I think that it would be really good if every class has a discussion on the ethics, not just of the profession of that area, but just of academics in general. I think there's a way. It's not something I've seen.
Well,
so far.
I'm doing something a little different this year, and somebody asked the question about online, and we only do online. Well, I only do online classes, but I have mine at the very top of the syllabi. But I have a Zoom session with my online students within the first 2 weeks. I'm having it Wednesday, tomorrow night. And that's the first thing that we talk about. Pull up the syllabus and we talk about that, and then we talk about what that means. But I don't dwell on it. I'm not spending 15, 20 minutes even on it, but I'm spending probably a good, healthy 5 minutes to make sure no one has any questions, make sure everybody's very clear about what that is. And then we go on with, and then that leads us into what is plagiarism, and then we kind of use that as the teaching moment, how to properly cite and how more than 10 words verbatim should be in quotation marks. I mean, things of that nature, because they don't, some of them just don't know.
I think that's a good point. One of the things that she said that really kind of resonated with me was using examples that are relevant to them. I gave a talk to a class once, and the example I gave was I talked about Ward Churchill. And he was a guy who made some very incendiary comments after 9/11. Got a lot of people good and offended. Well, they start poking into his background, and they realize his scholarship had some really glaring issues with it, to the point that he ultimately wound up losing his job on, I think it was like 10 or 11 counts where they could show he had falsified his research. And I've been able to find some specific examples, and it really hit one of the students because he had given some very bad interpretations of some research on how Native Americans had been treated by the military in the 1800s. And there was a student there who was very passionate about Native American rights. And when I explained how something that she had thought had actually happened really hadn't, not to say that the government did not give them the shaft to do in creative ways, but when I could show this horrible, horrible sounding thing didn't actually happen, she sat back, and that really clicked with her. My gosh, anyone who learns this, when all these other bad things did happen, it undercuts the case against them. That's why this was important. And we had some really good conversations about it. If you can find something like that that's going to resonate with them, that really helps. The challenge is figuring out what that's going to be on the front end.
If there's a message on the chat here from Colleen Swain, it says that Florida, for every major assignment, students would have to write and sign the honor code. We still had some problems, but it did stop some of the issues.
I like the idea of that being a part of the test. I think them having to confront it every time they do the assignment, I think is a very good idea. I like that.
Well, that's what she said at the start of the presentation, that people reaffirming their integrity reduces cheating. And the honor code is a simple way to do that.
Do you find that it's, in your office, do you see more undergraduate students or do you see more graduate students?
I see more undergraduate students. When I do see the graduate student, the difference though is the severity. I see far more undergrads. The grad students though, the level of severity is generally much, much worse. And the sanctioning can have a much greater impact on them. To the point that it can impact their ability to proceed in that program at all.
The presenter was talking about it was not training the word that she used. They have to pay $50 and go to some training, she said.
Yeah.
I think that is a good idea. Do we have something like that?
What it sounded like she said was if they're found to have committed an act of to plagiarize or otherwise cheated, they have to do a course on academic integrity. They charge them $50 for that.
Uh-huh.
That I think is a great idea. We do not currently have something like that in place, but that's something I would really like to see us do. I'm certainly open to it.
I mean, I think it'd be nice if we had, and maybe we do, but it just kind of feels like it's just up to whatever. So there's different levels. Someone could do the same thing in my class, they're doing his, and maybe in my class I'd look the other way, or I'd give a 0 and they'd fail that class. It seems like it would be in our best interest to have more common policies across the university for students, different levels?
The biggest concern I have isn't so much that faculty members handle a lot of it themselves. I actually like them being able to have that level of flexibility. My concern is that it doesn't get reported. I get maybe 60 reports on academic misconduct each year. And with a campus this size, you can't convince me that that's the only ones that have happened.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I was thinking as a new faculty, I didn't know
Mhm.
that I was supposed to report. So how do we tell the faculty, like, if they don't come to a workshop like this, or they don't read some policy in the HOP or something, that says you report this, how do we get that information across?
Yeah, because just to clarify, it has been 6 years here, and you came to my class last week. And then I realized that even if it's a small thing that I can handle it, I should report it. I didn't know that.
I am trying to get myself invited to as many faculty meetings as I can. We're trying to do more to get the word out. It's, the challenge is, it's a weird thing that where student affairs intersects with academics. A lot of the conduct stuff is really easy for me to do because it's really kind of me and 1.5 other people in my office. There's very little I have to do to get that stuff changed. It's a totally different thing for me to get several hundred faculty members all on board, especially in a couple of departments where there's some really bad institutional memory. I know a couple of departments, there were some bad experiences that actually were before I got here. And to this day, I never get anything from it. And when I've talked to individual faculty members, it's usually faculty members who've been here a while, and they'll always say the same thing. Well, several years ago, there were some big issues, it was reported and nothing was ever done. Well, I was probably 2 other schools back in my career when that happened. But it does, you know, in a community like that, that information carries a lot of weight. So I'm trying to do more outreach to the faculty. I'm trying to do more of it directly to the faculty. The challenge is, how many emails do each of us get a day? You know, I can email, I can do stuff. It's really coming down to the more face-to-face contact I have, the better the chances that it'll stay. And honestly, y'all can have a big impact on that as well. You know, talk to your colleagues, talk to your department chairs, you know, anything you can do to get the word out. And I will go anywhere and talk to anyone about it.
Maybe through Canvas, like a training that all faculty has to do. Because if you want to drive a van of the university, you have to go to a training. It takes several hours to do it. Then if in the health and safety environmental office, they are forcing faculty that teach lab to do a training. And the student has to do it. So maybe something like that, just small tips, small questions, everybody has to do it.
I actually have that, I think they're almost ready to go. I'm working on a series of video presentations. The good thing is they're all about 5 minutes a pop. Not the ones with that.
Yes.
That's the ones I maybe you do are specific training for hearing officers.
Let's see that to done. I did them all yesterday. They're done.
Was I wrong on how bad section 2 was?
Oh, man.
I can say that because I was the one that did it. There's a hearing involved training we do for hearing officers, which Dr. Newsom was good enough to let us sucker into. With the other conduct stuff, it's like a 5-minute presentation is really all it takes. So we're getting ready to get that online. The challenge is my ability to make stuff mandatory is really limited. Yeah, I can have it out there, but for years I have been begging people to serve as hearing officers because the process we had in place where they would be chosen for me, they stopped doing it. And there was nothing in place for us to actually get hearing officers. I had to literally go and beg. Dr. Newsom is a good example of that. There had been a committee that was part of their job. And one day that changed and my ability to get hearing officers was really curtailed for several years. That's gotten a lot better and I'm trying to get more face time with the faculty. all that to say, I can have a lot of resources available. I can ask, I can suggest, I can explain why it's a good idea, I can explain why this is a protection, this protects due process. If the student ever does sue, this completely covers the faculty members. What I can't do is make it mandatory. And that's one of the things a lot of people don't understand. Well, why does the student affairs guide handbook have anything to do with academic misconduct? It's another layer of protection for the faculty members. There's a property interest in their courses and their grades. By having someone outside of academics who takes a look at it, that's another layer showing that what the faculty member wanted to do, in all likelihood, is going to be turned out to have been the right thing. You have someone else looking at it, and there's specific things that we're offering to protect the students' rights. So if they do challenge it in court, it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, what you could do is you could send us a link to your site or website or information, and we can add it under the presentation today. And just, you know, that maybe we can get a few more faculty to look at it.
Sure. Last year, I got to talk to one department, one college that was meeting at the very beginning of the semester. It was arts and sciences. This year, I got to do the same thing with health sciences right afterwards. So I am, bit by bit, we're getting there.
We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank y'all for letting me come talk. Any other questions? Anything else I can answer or address? Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. We have another workshop on Thursday. It's over in the center, and it's just kind of research with friends where we sit down and we just talk to one another about what we're doing with our research, see if anybody's interested in teaming together or someone's doing something similar. And we'll do that. We do that twice a year. It's kind of interdisciplinary focus. And from that, a lot of people develop these relationships and say, hey, I'm doing this, my class is doing this, and they do, cross cases and different things. So if you're interested in working with somebody on your research or finding someone that has similar interests, this might be a venue for you to attend.
Or just to get feedback.
Yeah, you can throw it out there and say, what do you think? Would this be an idea? And others can give you ideas. So yeah. If you don't have anything going on, come see us. That's right. Remember, your kids are in school now.
Sorry, don't follow.
Julie, what time is it again on Thursday?